Poi.
So the second lecture is on the what I have titled "The Fundamental Left-Right Asymmetry of Natural Languages and Greenberg Universal 20," which is actually the first instance of clear left-right asymmetry, which again seems to be very pervasive. So let me just read Greenberg's Universal 20. When any or all of the items, demonstrative, numeral, and descriptive adjective precede the noun, they are always found in that order. If they follow, the order is either the same or its exact opposite, which may be translated into two. If you look at two, at least one interpretation, he leaves open the possibility that some of these precede and some of these follow, and in the most strict interpretation, all of them either precede or follow. If they do, this means that you find the pattern in two. So you find demonstrative, numeral, adjective that precedes the noun. You don't find the opposite order preceding the noun, but to the right of the noun, you find two orders, according to, so either the same or its mirror image. And these are, we'll come back to the Greenberg's Universal 20, which may, well, let me say it later. Now, the same situation seems to hold of many other cases. Another one is given in 3, which was originally shown by Hezron, but also taken up by others, and Planck in particular. So you find, if you choose only 3 out of many different classes of adjectives, we'll see tomorrow that in fact one has to distinguish 2 sources of adjectives, one similar to the adverbs of the sentence and the other reduced relative clauses. Here would be the adverb type, although you cannot see exactly, but so if you choose size, color, and nationality, in many languages they appear in this order, at least in the unmarked order. That should also be the case in Russian, but I leave it to you. You can also reverse the order in certain cases, but then you have to provide a special context, and this is what I take to involve the 2 types of adjectives, as you will see. Again, in front of the noun, you don't find the mirror image, with nationality being more to the left than color and size, but to the right of the noun, you find either the same order, size, color, nationality, or the mirror image. So that again is, there is a recent paper by which I cite the Autonomous, who argues that within the noun phrase there is a more general distribution of arguments and modifiers, so that before the noun arguments seem to occupy a, I say higher, but let's say more to the left position than modifiers. This is true especially for head final languages. You don't find the opposite order, although it would seem to be expected if arguments are thought to be closer to the noun than modifiers. But that doesn't seem to be the case, suggesting that arguments have to reach special position to be licensed. And he says that to the right of the noun you get both orders. And that's again. Another case is the order of adverbs, like I picked like no longer, always, completely. This is the order that you find in English or in other languages. You don't find the opposite. Now these, again, as we saw earlier, seem to correspond to aspects, so no longer corresponds to, or seems to be close to terminative aspect, completely to completive aspect, and so on. But in any case, they seem to be ordered, and also like aspects. To the left of the verb, you only get one order. To the right of the verb, you can get both orders. These have been studied for, well, for Italian and also for some Austronesian languages, especially Malagasy. There are works showing that you have the mirror image of these particular adverbs. Then there is an old article by a French linguist, Boisson, who claims that before the verb, the unmarked, at least, order is with temporal PPs preceding locative PPs, preceding manner PPs, like with and so on. But you never find the opposite order before the verb, although you find both orders again after the verb. So it's a real pattern. In 7, actually I didn't give Abel's case, but it's a recent work there where he gives evidence that exactly the same pattern is found with the order of 3 verbal elements in a single language family, namely within the Germanic languages, with modals, auxiliaries, and lexical verb, you find more possibilities to the right than to the left. So there is a left-right asymmetry. The same seems to be true of mood, tense, and aspect, which typically come before the verb in the order mood. If you think of mood as especially evidential, and, inferential, and speech act mood, but not realis, which may be lower down. So mood, tense, aspect before the verb, and no mirror image before the verb, but the 2 orders after the verb. To go to a much subtler case, in modern Greek, you find that before the verb, the order of clitics is fixed. So you have the dative clitic that precedes the accusative necessarily. You don't find the opposite order. To the right of the verb, you find both orders. Once again, the right of the core element, verb, noun, adjective, is more liberal, so to speak, than to the left. So 10 shows you the general pattern that these cases seem to represent. Now, starting with Greenberg's Universal 20, more than 10 years ago, actually, I had tried to look at the orders of, as far as one can tell, but of demonstrative cardinals, numeral cardinals, adjectives, and noun, and see which orders were actually attested across languages. And I think I had found, and I still, with a larger sample that I managed to collect in the last 10 years, about 1,500 languages, that out of the 24 mathematical possibilities of combinations of these 4 elements, only 14 are actually attested. So the question is, how come that only a fragment of the possible orders are actually attested? And now I will try to give you the logic of the method. But let me say something about Greenberg's Universal 20 first, which remains virtually unchallenged for the first part, namely, in front of the noun, the overwhelming, but I guess the absolute, at least if one takes away possible fronting of adjectives to the first position, which means that there is also the dem num a order in addition to the a dem num and order. So apparently no language has an order in front of the noun as the unique order different from dem num a, the one you see in 2a. I said it remains virtually unchallenged despite the fact that he had looked at a few languages. It's an amazing finding. And also, I should say, another amazing thing about this universal of Greenberg is that he considered not only pairs of orders. Now, after Greenberg, many people have started talking about whether the numeral precedes or follows the noun, whether the demonstrative precedes or follows the nouns, but not looking at the entire order of all these elements. And if you don't look at the entire order, you run the risk of putting in the same class languages that must belong to different classes. Let me give you an example. I have it here. So if you take, and this relates to the fact that there are some exceptions to Greenberg's universal 20 that I have tried to derive, and which are the following, but only to the right of the noun. So, for example, which are excluded by Greenberg's formulation. So in Cuscitic Gabra, in Nilotic Lugo, in Logoli, Heine reports the order noun, numeral, adjective, demonstrative, which corresponds neither to dem num a nor to the mirror image. I should probably write it down. So in a number of languages, especially African languages, you have and this corresponds, if you think of Greenberg's formulation, neither to dem num a nor to a num dem. So it's a third case. And Hawkins, citing Hyman, mentions the existence of again of the order and a dem num. And of course, well, there are other, and noni in other many African languages have, this was also mentioned by Greenberg, many have this. And then you have the Gumbe case. Now, if you work with pairs of elements, you run the risk of putting all of these in the same class, because all of these have the order NA, all of these have the order N num, all of these have the order N dem. But this falsifies the picture, because this is by far the most popular, as Greenberg actually has noticed already, than all of the others. Then, I mean, this is much less popular. These are, as we will see, they come in different numbers. So one should actually look at the whole array of this element in the noun phrase, which is very difficult to do because we don't have enough information about where other things get in these positions. But I mean, ideally that should be the case, because otherwise, anyway, let me just go back to the left-right question. How are we going, before I actually go into Greenberg's Universal 20, how can we make sense of this left-right asymmetry? And my idea, which is still the idea I think is right, is to say, actually the three orders that you see in two, if we start from the simple cases, are really one order, if you think of it, because except for the position of the noun, you have either literally the same order of demonstrative, numeral, and adjective in 2A and 2C. That's the same order. If you forget about the position of the noun, the relative order of them, num A, is absolutely the same. And if you look at 2D, it's the mirror image, which is like saying it's the same order. It's as if when you look at yourself in the mirror, it's not someone different from you. It's only reversed. So it's just the mirror image, which makes it plausible to think that those three orders are actually derived from the same order. And how are they derived? Now, what I have proposed is that they are derived from the order in which you see them in front of the noun phrase. So demonstrative being higher than the numeral and the adjective. And there may be reasons of a semantic type to give the scope of these elements. And the fact that you have more orders to the right then is a function or is a consequence of the different way the noun phrase moves. It's the only element that can move, namely the noun phrase or anything containing the noun phrase. So you're not allowed to move by themselves the numeral phrase, the adjective phrase, unless you focalize, which you keep aside, or the demonstrative phrase. They cannot move unless they are part of a constituent which contains the noun phrase. Suppose that that is the case. Then we already know that there are ways in which things move in natural languages. If you think of interrogative movement, for example, if you say, here, the who that is fronted is related to the, is fronted by itself. But you can also front something which contains the engine of the movement, namely the WH, or more precisely, the element that is affected by this particular type of movement, which is WH movement, which fronts an interrogative element. So you can either move it by itself, and here you have also another possibility. Whose pictures did you see? Here you cannot move whose alone in English. You cannot say whose did you see pictures as opposed to who did you see pictures of. Now, these two cases are called in the generative jargon piping, namely when you move something which is bigger than the element that should be moving by itself because of. Now, suppose that now we take, instead of the WH, which has the feature responsible for the movement, but which transmits the feature, which may transmit the feature to something containing it. Suppose that instead of the WH here we say that there is a feature plus n, which is like the WH. You can either move it by itself, or you can move it in one of these two ways. By piping, which we may call regressive pipe piping, namely you move something which contains elements to the left of the element involved in the movement. For progressive pipe piping, you are moving something which contains elements to the right. Actually, it should be put into a hierarchical term, but let's say to the right. So this means that the noun phrase itself may move, or it can move this way, moving like in the picture of whom. It transmits, so to speak, its feature to here, and then it's this guy that moves. Or it can transmit up to this feature here, and so it's this guy that moves. Or in the progressive pipe piping, you first move this around to an intermediate, as we saw earlier, position, let's call it FP, and then you take this and you move it around. Maybe it's clearer in the handout. So you start off with 13. I put agra P's just to, as in the old work, but it's not clear if they are agreement phrases or something else that allows you to move around. So if you look at 14, you have a case where only the noun phrase moves by itself. And moves, let's say, instead of one movement, successive movements around the various elements without reversing their order. So it's like passing by, and it goes up to the very end. And then it gives you the order n, dem, num, a. If I had thought, if nothing moves, then you get 13. This is, I forgot to say that. So in the old work, I had thought that if nothing moves, then you get this order. If it moves with the other pipe piping, then you have the progressive type of movements and order, and then you move first the NP around the AP, and then you, like in the whose picture type, then you are forced to move NP, AP around NUMP. And then again you're forced to move the NP, AP, NUMP around NP. And then you reverse the order. So by exploiting the different types of movements, no pipe piping, or pipe piping of the progressive type here, you get the orders in 16. So if you don't move anything, dem, num, an. If you move just the noun phrase, you get 16b. If you move the noun phrase with progressive pipe piping, so first it moves around A, then it takes it, and so on, then you reverse the entire order, you get 16c. And then 17 gives you only cases where you do partial movement, I thought. Well, if you just move the NP around the A and you stop there, then you get dem, num, and A. If you go one step further, you get 17b without reversing anything. But if you apply the other type of pipe piping, you reverse with respect to N, A, and num, and you stop there. But if we look at 18, you see the asterisks signal non-attested orders, and the ticks signal the attested orders. Interestingly, the those in square, which is at the end of page 3 and at the beginning of page 5, the two orders which are most frequent are those, actually the very is Z or Z. So it's NA num dem. And the second most frequent order is 18A, dem num an. And then you have various a decline in the frequency of languages that instantiate the orders that are actually attested, namely 18A, B, C, D, M, N, P, Q, R, T, U, V, and Y, and Z. These are the, and in that paper I gave also some of the evidence for that particular order found in those languages. So the idea would be, I will go through a couple of cases to show you that with these assumptions, you are actually able to derive only the attested orders and not to derive the unattested ones, which seem to me to be. Now the next point was even more ambitious, although it's much more difficult, is to try to account for the numerosity of the languages that instantiate a particular order. So I was saying that the order by far most common is 18Z, the last order, NA num dem. And then you have a declining number of languages that instantiate the various orders. This is not so clear in that older work. I used this very vague few languages, very few languages, many languages, so it was quite vague. But the basic assumption to obtain the result were those given in 19. So the base order, the order from which all languages start, is the one I sketched, with demonstrative being higher than numerals, cardinals, and those being higher than adjectives. And then you had parameters of movement. So I thought, well, first is no movement. In a while I will say that this is wrong. And I didn't realize that at that time. So if there is no movement, then nothing happens, apparently, and you get the order dem num an, where n remains to the right, head final. Or you have NP movement plus pipe piping of the whose picture type, which gives you typically the most attested order, 18Z. Then you have NP movement without pipe piping, which means that you just move the noun phrase without reversing anything, and you get the order n dem num a, which is actually much less frequent. That's why I put marked, without knowing why that should be marked. But a posteriori, it seemed that if you don't have pipe piping, you get an order which is not very popular, as Greenberg said. Then you also had movements with the other type of piping, namely pictures of whom, where you move the noun phrase plus something that precedes, like the adjective. Then you had the total partial movement as another parameter, and crucially that you cannot move by themselves any of the modifiers. If you make these assumptions and you let the system go, then you get the 14. It takes some time to work it out, but you only get the 14 orders that are attested without getting the orders that are not attested. That's the idea. Let me just show you how that happens in some cases. In the article I give the whole cases so you can check there. So for example, the unattested order num dem an cannot be derived. Why? Because the NP, which has remained low to the right, has not moved, apparently. And the modifiers to its left are in the wrong base order, because the order of the elements before the movement are dem, num, a. And here we have num, dem, a, wrong order. M, 18M is a and dem, num. This is attested and has a well-formed derivation, although marked, I would say, yeah, with raising the noun phrase plus piping of the picture of whom type of the lowest modifier, namely the adjective, followed by raising of this above dem and num. So you start out with dem, num, a, n, then instead of, you're moving something, but instead of moving just the noun, you move something which contains the noun and the adjective. And this constituent moves up above dem and num. And a dem num. This derivation, again, is attested and differs from the preceding one in having movement of the noun phrase around the adjective, as in the whose picture type and piping, but then moving of NA without piping up to above them. So again, this is a possible outcome. Num, a, and dem is a more complex case, and there are very few languages with this particular order. If you start out from dem, num, a, n, you do piping of the picture of whom type of num, a, n as a constituent around them. So you take n, you project up to a, p, and num, p, and then you take this constituent and you move it up above them. Num, n, a, dem also has a derivation possible, which is, in this case, moving the noun phrase around the adjective, then at this point, taking a bigger chunk containing the num on the other side and moving everything around the dem. I mean, it takes some time to look at the way these are derived. But I did realize one thing, because I only, in that work, I only considered modifiers. And as we will see tomorrow, there is a big difference in word order between modifiers and heads. So the distinction is between a single element like a verb, an auxiliary, a modal, a complementizer, which are heads, not, they are a single element, and phrases. Phrases are noun phrases, prepositional phrases, etc. As we will see tomorrow, if you bear the patient enough, what we actually see is that there is a segregation of the heads on one side and of the phrases on the other side. And the question is, how do we get that segregation in the ideal head final and the ideal head initial languages? So, if you look at a noun phrase considering heads, you find that typically elements that are behaving like heads are things like determiners, articles, case, number, plural, singular, diminutive in some language, and all the rest are modifier phrases. So demonstrative phrase is something bigger than just the demonstrative. It's a complex element. Numerals are clearly phrasal, because you can say 304. So you have a big constituent for the numeral. And even if you have just 3, this is a special case of a bigger thing. So it's a phrase. And clearly also for adjective. These are all phrases. And if you look at languages, then you find that in head final languages, typically, all the phrases precede, and all the heads follow in the ideal case. So the heads typically plural, case, or determiner. In the ideal head final languages follow the noun, whereas the demonstrative, the numeral, and the adjective precede. Dreyer challenged the question of the position of the adjective. I will say something maybe tomorrow. In any case, so I did not consider heads, and that made me make a mistake. Namely, to think that if you go back to 13, the order of in 2, the order in 2a, then num an, did not involve any movement, because I didn't look at the heads, which are interspersed among the phrases, and yet they get segregated on the other side. So typically, case is very high. It's even above demonstrative. I mean, if you think of case, it's telling you something about the function of the noun phrase with respect to the sentence, whether it's a subject or an object. So it's an interface. And it's almost one of the, it's probably the highest element of the noun phrase. Yet, it's found to the right of the noun phrase. Plurality, I mean, plural elements are below numerals and above adjectives. You see that in many languages. Yet they end up to the right of the noun. So that means that there must be a derivation that from the scope relation of these elements will affect the segregation of heads from the phrases. And that's a complex way. But I will say something tomorrow, but I am aware that more work, much more work is actually needed to work out the details. But in any event, if you, by taking this into account then, and also doing a larger sample of languages, if you look at page 6, here I have slightly changed the basic assumptions. Now, the first one has remained, namely, dem num a n p is the base order. Also, the second assumption remains: only plus n elements can move with their projection or with by piping a larger phrase. So what I said earlier, that you can only move NP up the structure in either of those 3 ways. just moving the NP by itself, where you don't reverse apparently anything except for the heads, or by pipe piping, in either of the two ways. And you see, anyway, the assumption that are given there. So with progressive pipe piping, you get the head initial option. With the picture of whom pipe piping, you get the head final option. We'll see better tomorrow, I think, I hope, with the sentence. Then, without pipe piping, it's the second option for head initial, in the sense that you're moving the NP to the very beginning, giving you a head initial order, like NP, dem, num, A. That's head initial. Then you have change of movement mode, and so my attempt was, but I didn't succeed, is to try not only to derive by such assumptions the 14 orders that are attested, and not deriving the 10 orders that are never attested, but also trying to derive the decline of languages in genera, in drier sense, namely bigger families of the same type, to neutralize the effect of number of languages that may be biased because you pick up languages from the same family. So it's correctly drier sense, it's better to count genera, which are like Romance or Germanic rather than Italian, French, Spanish, etc. Although there is a decrease in the number of languages and the number of genera. So, as you see in one, and underneath I gave also Dreyer's figures in languages and genera, but with a much bigger sample. So the most popular, as I said, is NA num dem, and here to the right, if you have patience, you can see what kind of movements with this assumption will give you that order. Then the second one is the dem num an, but you see that there is a decrease in genera from 113 to 103, and even more of languages, but that is less telling. And then if you go down, there is only a slight difference with respect to Dreyer's decline of number of languages. In 4 and 5, because you see that the number of genera is smaller in 4 than in 5. And in my count of the bigger sample, it seems that there are more genera in 4 than in 5. But then, more or less, it's equal to Dreyer's count. Simply that the number of genera is increased. And then I tried to see if one could, in principle, make sense of the fact that certain orders seem to be dispreferred. So ideally, one should be able to account also for that, maybe by looking at the way in which, under the movement analysis I gave, these are derived, and what kind of options are taken, and a little bit a posteriori though, say that some options are more marked than other options. One would like to have an absolute measure of markedness and not calculate the markedness on the basis of the number of languages. So there is something still missing here, but I mean that was the general picture that I tried to I also tried in another paper to show that the same seems to go on if you turn the page with mood, tense, aspect, and V, where if you make the correspondence, mood with demonstratives, tense with numerals, and aspect with adjectives, I mean, there is no real correspondence, but just in the ordering of these elements, with mood being very high mood, like evidential, narrative, speech-like mood, and so on, then you find with some apparent counterexamples that can be, I think, be shown to be spurious, you find exactly the same pattern. And if you go through, you will see that more telling, as I was saying earlier, is the case that Abels, he's a professor at UCL in London, the pattern that he claims to be holding of Germanic languages, where that is only within a language family and a very well-studied language family, because there are many Dutch linguists, German linguists, and I've looked at all the dialects that show variation in the order of auxiliary, modal, main verb. And there it seems that you find only certain orders and you don't find other orders. So that it seems that this pattern comes up over and over again. And with this I more or less finish. You must be tired, I am also. In 24 and 25, I gave two possible derivations of what happens, I mean, of the two orders of tense, aspect, and verb, where when they precede, they have that order, as actually Chomsky in his early book on syntactic structures had already seen, namely tense precedes perfect aspect, which precedes progressive aspect, where in English, of course, the verb attaches to the progressive morphology, and so there is a little bit of a movement. In languages, I mean, there is a whole lot of variation in how much verbs move. If you remember from the previous handout, the whole, let me just give you the long array of I don't find it anymore. The long stretch of moods, tenses, aspects, and the verb, then Italian differs from English in the possibility of having the verb either lower but not any lower than completive aspect, namely adverbs like completamente have to follow, like early have to follow. Even English moves a little bit because well, early, and quickly of a certain type have to follow the verb. All the other adverbs precede. But Italian allows the verb to precede up to habitual adverbs. So it means that the verb can climb up. And there are complex effects on how it climbs up. Strangely enough, it climbs up without reversing most of the lower adverbs. So that in Italian, post-verbally, you have the same order as the order in English. So you say no longer, always, well, as the typical order after the verb in Italian, as in pre-nominal. Anyway, And I gave one case of a agglutinating language where the same three elements, progressive aspect, perfect aspect, and future tense, is in the mirror image. And that should, I mean, if you think of these as bound morphemes rather than free morphemes, then the verb has to go up and provide something for the suffixes to hang on. But then, as you see, you have to suppose that the movement is of the progressive piping. So the verb first raises and attaches to the progressive suffix, then the whole raises above the perfect suffix, and then the whole thing raises up to the tense suffix. So reversing the order of these elements and giving you the mirror image of, let's say, English to a large extent, or many other languages. So, I mean, by computing these orders in this way, you can hope to find a unique underlying order among languages and attribute the sum of the differences that we see simply to the way elements are rearranged, so to speak, in the order of these functional elements. Okay, I would stop here, and if there are questions on this second part.
Written questions?
I have a very strange question. I like this theory and I want to believe in it, but I still can't understand what makes all these projections move. Why do they move? Is there any
That's a very fundamental question for which there is no there is no clear answer. I mean, if you think, I mean, generally we are thinking of, I mean, in the early days when generative grammar did not worry too much about word order differences among languages, the movements that were talked about always had a semantic effect. Namely, you move a focalized element to the beginning, you move a WH element to the beginning for reaching a certain position of operator, you move an object to subject position in the passive when you want to demote the subject, or you want to, with various kind of semantic effects or pragmatic effects or some kind of effect. Now, word order seems to be totally deaf to, or totally irrelevant to the semantics, in the sense that it seems plausible to believe that if a language has tense, aspect, voice, verb, has a tense, aspect, voice like independent particles before the verb, and another language has these three elements attaching as suffixes on the opposite side of the verb, in the mirror image, not always. I mean, mirror image is the most popular order, but there are orders which are not mirror image. So that, as you know, that we interpret in the same way, that the scope relation between tense, I mean, between, let's say, inferential mood, like probably or purely, and tense is the one I say, with probably being higher than, I mean, with the epistemic mood being higher than tense, for the simple reason that to say that something is probable, you need to have a proposition. And to have a proposition, you need to anchor an event in time. So there is a natural scope relation between these elements, and yet you find languages where the suffix for probable, some languages have a suffix for the epistemic probability, and that is to the right, further away from tense. But it must be the same computation that we are doing. So this means that this kind of movements governing the word order of languages have nothing to do with meaning. And that's the big mystery. Why should we care about moving things around? If there is, I mean, I say it with this metaphor of movement, which I think buys you a number of things. But in any case, you have to deal with the fact that despite the variety, the huge variety of orders, languages seem to have the same scope relations among these things. So that remains, that was a very important question. Sorry to disappoint you, but
Yes, but in fact, when you speak about semantics, you mainly mean scope relations.
in this case, yeah, it's scope relations.
So in fact, we can think about, say, focalization and so on, about some as in fact having some semantic effects which are not related to the scope, to compositionality and so on.
Right. No, I mean, these word order differences seem to be orthogonal to the scope relations, right? And other movements instead seem to, well, they also may have, I'm thinking of, for example, if you passivize an indefinite quantifier and you have a universal quantifier, so if you say one language was spoken by everybody in the room, some languages apparently only get interpretation that there is a single language which does not vary with everyone in the room. Yeah. So it has some effect on scope. So there are, but this is passive, let's say. And these are movements that have to do with all kinds of. So really the mysterious thing is why. Maybe it's the wrong way to look at it in terms of movement. Some people have said maybe we can, but I find it extremely difficult to obtain the movement. For example, Neleman and Abels and Neleman have tried to give a partially symmetric analysis of universal 20, but they still need some movements to be able to derive some. So that remains a big.
So are there questions? Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to ask you, can we describe this situation we have cross-linguistically in terms other than movement, like a different metaphor that you can count?
Yeah, I mean, I was just saying that one would like to have something, some tool which is very different from the tool that we use to account for orders, different orders that have an effect on semantics or pragmatics. And some people have tried to say maybe we don't need in order we can have, let's say, so we don't seem to need an order in that we can generate directly, symmetrically, dem num A to the left of the noun, or dem num A to the right of the noun, and actually get also the relative order, because then you get this order here, and this order here, if you draw these lines like this, without crossing branches, which is not allowed. Yet you find more difficulty with the order and then num A. So even Abels and Nenemann could not derive this symmetrically, because you would get the following situation where you have noun, but then you would need to have this ordering, which does not make sense with them being closer to the noun than num and A. So for this case, they need to say that you have movement. This also Franz Planck said essentially the same with respect to the adjectives that we saw. And also there is a problem in case of, in certain cases you have to really cross, well, for example, you have cases like, let me see. Well, you would have to cross, for example, yeah, to be able to generate directly the order and then num A, you would have to continue to have them very high, num intermediate, and adjective low, but then have these crossings to get the right order. Sorry. And so, so it seems difficult to have a system that allows you enough flexibility to derive, to have all the attested orders without thinking in terms of movement. Tomorrow we'll go back to this with respect to the sentence and see the segregation that I said, with even more problems related to the distinction between the ideal orders and the non-ideal orders, the non-consistent orders, which seem to be the majority. So that's another mystery. But these are.
Yes, and I have another question. So, wait a minute. Does anyone? Okay. I think I'll be.
Okay.
No.
My question would be, why partition two piping phenomena into the progressive and the regressive one? Because if we are right, and it's hard to move things around without any semantics whatsoever, it would be extremely hard to postulate that progressive and regressive pipings involve different semantic effects. Because in the end, all that matters is that WH phrase fronting to the left periphery of the clause, and whatever is left elsewhere or not. So why this motivation, given the presumably unified semantics?
So if I understood correctly what you were saying, you said that even the piping and the ordinary cases of WH movement, they don't seem to affect the interpretation. Is that what you were saying?
More or less or so. The partition apparently would not if it's WH movement we are looking after.
Yeah. No, although there are differences, at least in English, between the two types of piping. The whose picture type is more, is less restricted than the picture of whom. And this is, I want to relate it to the fact that the order which involves, I didn't say that, but the order which involves the picture of the whose picture piping, the progressive, gives you the most numerous languages. Whereas the picture of whom piping gives you the next one, namely the dem, num, a, en. And you can see that it's more marked, the picture of whom, at least in English, because you cannot have it in embedded clauses. So you can say, whose picture did you see? Fine. Pictures of whom did you see? This is higher style, but it's fine. But if you say, I wonder whose picture he saw, whose pictures he saw, fine. I wonder pictures of whom he saw, bad. So it means that there are more restrictions on one type of piping than the other. And I don't know if there are semantic differences between, certainly they are stylistically differentiated. That, I don't think there are semantic distinctions, because as you said, the real is who. And what counts is that the who has to reach high up. Whether it carries along something else does not seem to affect its interpretation. Yeah. Maybe that's, now I never thought in these terms, maybe that's why piping is used for word order differences that don't lead to any, yeah, because maybe I didn't say, I'm a bit tired, that now I think that even the order which I thought involved no movement, namely dem, num, a, n, is actually derived by movement. If we want to, but movement with pictures of whom piping, because you take n and you take a and you move it up, then you take this new constituent, you take num and you move it up, so you don't reverse anything. We'll see tomorrow. It's and so that all orders are derived by movement under this potential. That's an interesting. So you're saying, yeah, the piping does not seem to affect really semantics. That's true. I don't know how much piping you have in Russia, but certainly you can move. I don't know. At least in Italian, you can say something like. To win which kind of prize would he be happy? Where you take even a sentence with the WH at the end and you move up everything. So, and that does not seem to, I mean, that seems to be a higher level of language in Italian, but no difference in meaning from what type of prize would be without moving by. Okay, thank you.
Yes, and I have another strange question actually, because I was when you were speaking about this asymmetry between preceding and following the head. Let's call it head.
Right.
I mean, descriptively, I was thinking about another asymmetry of this kind, namely that in general languages prefer suffixes rather than prefixes. I don't insist that you should relate these two facts now, right? But but in general, I think that there is only one family in the world that has only prefixes, and these are crazy Athabascan languages, which have very different sequences of prefixes, and then the root, and then there is some theory that it's actually the result of some movement of suffixes.
Because of the mirror image in certain cases, or
they have a very strange FX order actually. It's a kind of mix. I think there were some attempts to treat this in the generative framework, but not in the distributive morphology and so on. But anyway, so you have so if we think about this more functionally, we may think about this as a kind of some processing constraints and tendencies. But anyway.
yeah, it's not. Yeah, I cannot give you, as you said, an answer, but certainly it relates somehow to, because as I said, when Greenberg had already seen that he said the most popular order is noun, adjective, noun, them. So, whereas the nominal is less. So in that case, in that sense, there is some relation with the numerosity of suffixes, but that remains to be discovered. Yeah.
Okay. So.
In grammar reference books of English, there are some recommendations to order adjectives in a special order before the noun. For example, we can say a beautiful young lady, but we shouldn't say a young beautiful lady, because opinion should precede the factual information, for example, like this. Is this case similar to this? How universal is it? And should we treat any specific word orders in such phrases in English using movements?
Actually, I will be tomorrow in the second lecture. I will be talking about these things. So it's very to the point. I think some people have claimed, just to anticipate what I'm saying tomorrow in more detail, that when you reverse the order, so in general you say, out of the blue, you can say, oh, I'm going out, I want to buy a big brown dog. That's the unmarked. You don't need any preceding discourse. But if you say, I'm going to buy a brown big dog, you have to stress brown, which comes before big, and you need a special context that you are contrasting brown with black, whereas in the other case you don't. So some people have actually claimed that you move from the lower position, the color adjective, to a higher position by focus movement. Because there is also this effect of, but it's not entirely clear that this is the case, because if you could, then you should do it with any adjective. But you will see tomorrow that you can do it only with predicative adjectives, namely with adjectives that can be in predicate position, as opposed to non-predicative adjectives that cannot be reversed with respect to each other. So even English has a rigid ordering, although you don't immediately see that because of the existence of the second source of adjectives that gives you the impression that you can switch them around. But that's just an impression, because there are many more restrictions on what you can do. Well, anyway, I'll come back to this question tomorrow.
Okay, I think we should stop now.
So,
Thank you very much. See you everybody tomorrow at